Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 1. Now let's start the fanfic. The silence in the Konoha hospital room was a heavy blanket, suffocating Naruto more effectively than any genjutsu he'd ever encountered. Outside, the village was slowly, painstakingly piecing itself back together. The vibrant hues of rebuilding efforts, the earthy browns of new lumber, the pale creams of fresh plaster, painted a picture of hope against the scarred canvas of the Fourth Great Ninja War's aftermath. But within these sterile white walls, hope felt like a distant, flickering flame. Months had bled into one another since the final, earth-shattering clash against Kagaya. Months since the cheers of victory had echoed across the ravaged battlefield, months since the fallen had been mourned and the wounded carried back to the relative safety of Konoha. For Naruto Uzumaki, the hero of that war, the savior of the world, those months had been a solitary confinement of the body, a slow, agonizing crawl back from the precipice. His injuries weren't the dramatic, visible gashes that many other shinobi bore. There were no missing limbs, no deep lacerations that screamed for immediate attention. Naruto's wounds were insidious, a subtle sabotage of his very life force. The relentless strain of wielding Kurama's chakra, the constant pushing of his limits, and the final, desperate battles had taken a brutal toll on his chakra pathways, leaving them frayed and damaged like overloaded electrical wires. The medics called it chakra exhaustion on a systemic level, a vague term that did little to soothe the constant thrum of discomfort that vibrated through his being. The initial days had been a blur of medical ninjutsu, potent but unpleasant concoctions, and the worried faces of the few who initially visited. Kakashi-sensei, his left eye perpetually crinkled with concern, had been a frequent presence in the early weeks, his visits punctuated by quiet anecdotes and the rustle of his ever-present Ika paradise. Sakura too, in those first fragile days of peace, had diligently checked on him, her brow furrowed as she meticulously monitored his fluctuating chakra levels. But as the village slowly regained its footing, their visits became less frequent. Kakashi was burdened with the monumental task of overseeing the reconstruction, his days filled with endless meetings and strategic planning. Sakura, initially by his side in the medical tents, soon found her focus shifting. Sasuke had returned, a prodigal son stepping back into the fold, albeit with an air of detached introspection. Their shared history, the complex tapestry of their bond, demanded attention, a mending of fractured pieces that seemed to consume Sakura's every waking moment. Naruto understood, intellectually. He knew the importance of Sasuke's return, the delicate balance of power it represented for the village. He knew Sakura's deep-seated feelings for the Uchiha, a connection that had always been a thorny vine in the garden of his own heart. But understanding didn't negate the gnawing emptiness that settled in his chest with each passing day, each silent meal, each long, star-dusted night spent staring at the ceiling. The other villagers, those he had fought so fiercely to protect, offered their gratitude in the form of polite nods and murmured, "thank yous," when they occasionally crossed paths with a weary Kakashi or a preoccupied Sakura. But for Naruto himself, confined to his sterile room, their gratitude felt abstract, a distant warmth he couldn't quite feel. He was the hero, the savior, the boisterous knucklehead who had always craved recognition. Now, bathed in the quiet aftermath of his triumph, he felt like a ghost in the very village he had saved. The nurses and junior medics were efficient, their movements practiced and impersonal. They administered his medications, checked his vitals, and offered perfunctory smiles before moving on to the next patient. Their interactions were clinical, devoid of the warmth and camaraderie he had come to expect from his comrades. He was a patient, a case study in post-war recovery, not the loud, ramen-loving idiot who had always managed to worm his way into their hearts. The silence became his constant companion. It amplified the rhythmic beeping of the medical equipment, the distant sounds of the bustling village, and the relentless echo of his own thoughts. He replayed the war in his mind, the faces of the fallen, the weight of responsibility he had carried, the sheer terror and exhilaration of the final battle. He remembered the shared glances with Sakura, the unspoken understanding with Sasuke, the unwavering support of his friends. But those memories now felt like faded photographs, their vibrancy leaching away with each lonely day. He tried to focus on his recovery, diligently following the exercises prescribed by the medics, willing his sluggish chakra to flow smoothly once more. But the progress was agonizingly slow, each small improvement feeling like a monumental effort. The vibrant blue energy that usually crackled around him felt muted, hesitant, like a shy creature reluctant to emerge from its hiding place. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The seasons shifted outside his window, painting the leaves in fiery hues of autumn before blanketing the world in the serene white of winter. Still, the stream of visitors remained a trickle. Jiraiya-sama was gone, his absence a gaping wound that time did little to heal. The other Jinchuriki, those he had finally connected with, were scattered, each navigating their own paths in this newfound era of peace. And Sakura was a fleeting whisper in the corridors, a brief flash of pink hair in the distance. He heard snippets of conversations, her name intertwined with Sasuke's, hushed tones filled with a tenderness that twisted something inside him. He imagined them together, their shared trauma forging an even deeper bond, their quiet moments filled with a understanding he could never truly share. The neglect, unintentional as it might be, stung. He had always been the one left behind, the outcast, the one who had to fight twice as hard for even a sliver of recognition. He had thought the war had changed things, that his actions had finally earned him a place, a true connection with those he held dear. But here he was, alone in a hospital bed, while the girl he loved and the rival he respected seemed to have seamlessly moved on. One particularly bleak afternoon, as the weak winter sun cast long shadows across his room, Naruto found himself staring at his hands. They were the hands that had formed the Rasengan countless times, the hands that had connected with his fathers and the other tailed beasts, the hands that had helped seal away a goddess. They felt strangely foreign now, weak and listless. A wave of profound loneliness washed over him, so intense it felt physical. It was a cold, hollow ache that settled deep within his bones, a stark contrast to the fiery determination that usually burned within him. He was Naruto Uzumaki, the unpredictable #1 hyperactive knucklehead ninja. He was supposed to be loud, boisterous, surrounded by friends. This quiet, isolated existence felt like a betrayal of his very being. He closed his eyes, the image of Sakura's radiant smile, a smile rarely directed solely at him, flashing behind his eyelids. The memory, once a source of bittersweet longing, now felt like a fresh wound. He had always loved her, his feelings a constant, unwavering star in the turbulent sky of his life. But watching her happiness with Sasuke, a happiness that seemed to exclude him entirely, was a torment he could no longer bear. A bitter thought took root in his mind, a seed of resentment he had never allowed to sprout before. Had his feelings always been a one-sided affair? Had he been so blinded by his own desperate need for connection that he had misread the subtle nuances of their interactions? The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating. Naruto opened his eyes and stared at the blank wall, a new resolve hardening his gaze. He couldn't continue like this, a forgotten hero languishing in solitude. He needed to heal, not just physically, but emotionally. He needed to find a way to navigate this new reality, even if it meant accepting a truth that his heart stubbornly refused to acknowledge. The road ahead was uncertain, shrouded in the fog of his own disillusionment. But one thing was clear: The boy who had always chased after Sakura's affection, the boy who had yearned for a place within Team 7's dynamic, was slowly starting to fade. And in his place, something else was beginning to stir, a quiet determination to forge a new path, a path where his own well-being took precedence, even if it meant walking it alone. The ghost in the ruins of war was starting to find a new purpose, one born not of saving the world, but of saving himself. The day Naruto was finally discharged from the hospital felt surreal. The sterile scent of antiseptic that had clung to him for months seemed to dissipate as he stepped out into the crisp Konoha air. The village, still bearing the faint scars of war, pulsed with a renewed energy. Children laughed as they chased stray leaves, merchants called out their wares with familiar gusto, and the distant clang of hammers echoed the ongoing reconstruction. It was a symphony of resilience, a testament to the indomitable spirit of the hidden leaf. His legs felt wobbly, unused to the simple act of walking without the aid of medical support. His chakra, though slowly recovering, still felt like a sluggish stream. He moved with a cautious gait, a far cry from the energetic sprints that had once defined him. His destination was the Hokage Tower, a familiar landmark that now felt strangely distant. Tsunade, the Godime Hokage, greeted him with a gruff but undeniably relieved expression. The lines etched on her face seemed a little deeper, the weight of leadership in a time of crisis evident in her weary eyes. "Took you long enough, brat," she said, her voice raspy. The paperwork was piling up with patient Uzumaki, still occupying a bed. Naruto offered a weak grin. "Sorry, Ba-chan. My body decided to take its sweet time healing. HMPH. Well, you're out now. Don't think you can slack off. There's still plenty to be done." Tsunade leaned back in her chair, her gaze softening slightly. "How are you truly feeling, Naruto? Don't give me any of that, I'm fine." "Nonsense." Naruto hesitated for a moment, the familiar bravado struggling against the lingering weariness. "Tired, Ba-chan. Really tired. But, better. Glad to be out of that sterile box." "Good." Tsunade nodded curtly. "We've arranged for your old apartment to be cleaned up. Ino and Shikamaru took the initiative. Said it wouldn't do for the hero of the leaf to come back to a dusty mess." A hint of a smile played on her lips. "They even stocked the fridge with some questionable instant ramen." Naruto's chest warmed at the thought. His friends. Even amidst their own recoveries, they had thought of him. That's really great, Ba-chan. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank them." Tsunade's gaze turned serious again. "The village owes you a debt it can never truly repay, Naruto. Don't ever forget that." After a few more formalities and a stern warning from Tsunade not to overdo things, Naruto made his way to his apartment. The familiar streets of Konoha felt both comforting and alien. He noticed the gaps in the skyline where buildings had been destroyed, the makeshift stalls that had sprung up in their place, the quiet air of morning that still lingered beneath the surface of the village's rebuilding efforts. As he approached his old apartment building, a wave of nostalgia washed over him. It was here, in this small, cluttered space, that he had spent so many lonely nights, dreaming of acceptance and camaraderie. He climbed the familiar creaking stairs, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. The door wasn't locked. As he pushed it open, he was met not with the expected dust and disarray, but with a surprising scene of warmth and welcome. The small apartment was spotless, the worn wooden floors gleaming, the few pieces of furniture neatly arranged. A banner proclaiming, "Welcome home, Naruto," hung crookedly across the far wall, clearly the handiwork of someone less than skilled in aesthetics. And there they were, Shikamaru, leaning against the wall with his usual air of nonchalant boredom, a faint bandage still visible on his temple. Ino, her bright blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, meticulously arranging a vase of freshly cut flowers on the small table, a small scar peeking out from beneath her collar. Choji, a little thinner than usual but with his ever-present bag of chips, beaming at him from the doorway to the tiny kitchen. Lee, his youthful exuberance slightly subdued but his spirit undimmed, standing ramrod straight with a wide, welcoming grin, a brace visible on his arm. Kiba, with Akamaru barking excitedly at his feet, a patch of shaved fur visible near his ear. Hinata, standing slightly behind Kiba, her lavender eyes filled with a quiet, heartfelt relief. Naruto, Ino cried, rushing forward to engulf him in a hug, careful of his still recovering body. Welcome back, you knucklehead, Shikamaru drawled, a rare genuine smile gracing his lips. Naruto, my friend, it is so good to see you on your feet. Lee exclaimed, his voice filled with emotion. Choji offered him a chip. Glad you're back, Naruto. Kiba clapped him on the shoulder. Took you long enough, Dobi. Akamaru whined happily, nudging his leg. Hinata stepped forward shyly. Naruto, welcome home. Her voice was soft but sincere, her gaze filled with a warmth that always made his chest flutter, even if he didn't fully understand why. A lump formed in Naruto's throat. He hadn't realized how much he had missed them, their familiar faces, their teasing banter, their unwavering presence. He had been so consumed by his own loneliness in the hospital that he hadn't fully considered their own struggles. Guys, this is, wow, he managed, his voice thick with emotion. You didn't have to do all this. Troublesome, but someone had to, Shikamaru said, though his tone lacked its usual complaining edge. We all wanted to, Ino said, her eyes shining. It wasn't the same without you around, idiot. As they settled into the small apartment, sharing stories and catching up, the weight on Naruto's chest began to ease. He learned that they had all been hospitalized in the aftermath of the war, each bearing their own physical and emotional scars. Shikamaru had sustained a head injury protecting the allied shinobi force's headquarters. Ino had pushed her sensory abilities to their absolute limit, suffering severe mental exhaustion. Choji had used his expansion jutsu beyond its safe parameters, causing significant strain on his body. Lee had nearly crippled himself in a final, desperate attack. Kiba and Akamaru had faced numerous close calls in the thick of the fighting. And Hinata had stood bravely against Obito and Madara, her gentle strength unwavering even in the face of overwhelming power, sustaining internal injuries that had taken weeks to heal. Sakura's name, however, remained conspicuously absent from their conversations. No one mentioned her visits to Naruto in the hospital, or her current whereabouts. The silence surrounding her felt heavy, a stark contrast to the easy camaraderie filling the room. Later, as his friends eventually dispersed, leaving him alone in his newly cleaned apartment, Naruto found himself staring out the window at the twinkling lights of Konoha. A familiar ache settled in his heart, a dull throb that no amount of ramen or friendly banter could completely dispel. Sakura, he thought, his jaw tightening slightly. Where were you? The memories of his lonely weeks in the hospital resurfaced, the endless silence punctuated only by the impersonal interactions with the medical staff. He remembered the few times Kakashi-sensei had mentioned seeing Sakura around the village, always in Sasuke's vicinity. He recalled the fleeting glimpses he had caught of her in the early days after the war, her brow furrowed not in concern for him, but in focused determination as she tended to the wounded alongside Sasuke. A bitter taste rose in his mouth. He understood her feelings for Sasuke, he truly did. He had witnessed their complicated bond firsthand, the years of longing and pain that had finally culminated in a reunion. But where did that leave him? Their teammate, their friend, the one who had always been there, always ready to fight for them, always willing to risk his life without hesitation. So selfish, he thought, the word echoing in the quiet of his apartment. She's always been so selfish when it comes to Sasuke. It was a harsh judgment, one he had always resisted making. He had always excused her behavior, attributing it to the intensity of her feelings for the brooding Uchiha. But now, lying alone in his clean apartment, the silence amplifying his resentment, he couldn't help but feel a profound sense of abandonment. It's okay, she loves Sasuke, he repeated in his mind, the words laced with a sarcasm he couldn't suppress. But what about our friendship? What about everything I've done for her? All the times I've put my life on the line to protect her, to bring Sasuke back. Does none of that matter? Does her love for him completely erase everything else? He pictured her face, her bright green eyes usually filled with determination and compassion. But now, the image was tainted with a sense of self-absorption. He saw her focused solely on Sasuke, their world seemingly shrinking to encompass only the two of them, leaving him and their other friends as mere background figures. Where's the thanks, Sakura? Where's the gratitude? Where's the payback for all the times I've been there for you? The questions swirled in his mind, unanswered and accusatory. It felt as though she had simply discarded him, tossed aside their years of shared experiences and unwavering support for the sake of her long-awaited romance. A wave of weariness washed over him, deeper than the physical exhaustion of his recovery. It was the weariness of a heart that felt unappreciated, a spirit that felt overlooked. He had fought for the world, for his friends, for her. And now, in the quiet aftermath, he felt utterly alone. The warmth of his friend's welcome couldn't completely thaw the icy feeling of neglect that had taken root in his heart. As he drifted off to sleep, the image of Sakura's retreating back, her focus solely on Sasuke, was the last thing he saw. The hero of Konoha dreamt of a love that seemed to have no room for him. The week that followed Naruto's release from the hospital passed in a blur of tentative normalcy. He slowly reacclimatized to life outside the sterile confines of the medical ward, taking short walks around the recovering village, reacquainting himself with familiar faces, and trying to regain some semblance of his former energy. He spent time with his friends, sharing meals and laughter, the bonds forged in the crucible of war holding them together. Yet, beneath the surface of camaraderie, a subtle tension lingered, an unspoken awareness of the missing piece in their familiar circle. He crossed paths with Sakura a few times. Once, near the newly rebuilt training grounds, she was walking alongside Sasuke, their shoulders brushing, a quiet intimacy radiating between them. Another time, he saw her in the bustling marketplace, her brow furrowed in concentration as she examined medicinal herbs, Sasuke's stoic figure a silent presence beside her. Each encounter was fleeting, marked by a polite, almost perfunctory, "Hi, Naruto," from Sakura, sometimes echoed by a curt nod from Sasuke. There were no lingering conversations, no inquiries about his recovery beyond the superficial. It was as if an invisible barrier had sprung up between them, a chasm carved by unspoken feelings and diverging paths. The village, eager to express its gratitude to its hero, announced a formal ceremony of honor for Naruto. Banners bearing his image, alongside those of the other war heroes, adorned the main thoroughfare. Preparations were made for a grand celebration, a testament to his pivotal role in saving the world. For Naruto, the prospect of being the center of attention was both exhilarating and daunting. He had always craved recognition, but now, the weight of expectation felt heavier, the cheers of the crowd carrying a bittersweet echo in his heart. The day of the ceremony dawned bright and clear. The main plaza was packed with villagers, their faces a mixture of relief, gratitude, and joyous anticipation. Naruto stood on the makeshift stage alongside Kakashi-sensei and Tsunade, the Hokage's proud gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd. The applause was deafening, a wave of sound that washed over him, a tangible representation of the village's appreciation. His friends were there, standing together in the front row, their smiles genuine and encouraging. Hinata's gaze, as always, held a depth of emotion that made his cheeks flush slightly. His eyes inevitably found Sakura. She stood beside Sasuke, their hands intertwined, their fingers laced tightly together. A small, almost imperceptible smile played on Sakura's lips as she looked towards the stage, her expression serene. Sasuke's gaze, however, remained impassive, his dark eyes scanning the crowd with an air of detached observation. The sight of their intertwined hands, the unspoken closeness of their postures, sent a familiar pang of jealousy through Naruto's chest. The cheers of the crowd seemed to fade, replaced by the dull ache in his heart. Later that evening, a celebratory dinner was held in one of the newly rebuilt restaurants. The atmosphere was lively, filled with the chatter of reunited friends and the clinking of sake cups. Naruto found himself seated at a large table with his closest companions. Shikamaru and Temari engaged in their usual witty banter, Ino and Sai exchanged quiet smiles, Lee regaled Tenten with exaggerated tales of his wartime exploits, and Choji happily munched on a mountain of snacks. Hinata sat beside him, her presence a quiet comfort. But his gaze kept drifting towards another corner of the room, where Sakura and Sasuke sat together at a smaller table. They weren't overtly affectionate, but the subtle cues spoke volumes. The way Sakura leaned slightly towards Sasuke as she spoke, the almost imperceptible touch of his hand on her back, the shared glances that held a depth of understanding that excluded everyone else. Their closeness was a palpable presence, a constant reminder of the bond Naruto couldn't breach. The conversation around him faded into a distant hum. He tried to focus on what Hinata was saying, her soft voice recounting a heartwarming story of a rescued kitten. He nodded and offered polite responses, but his mind was elsewhere, fixated on the easy intimacy between Sakura and Sasuke. The joy of the celebration felt hollow, the laughter of his friends a distant melody. A particularly uncomfortable moment occurred when Ino, ever the perceptive one, raised her glass for a toast. To Naruto, she exclaimed, her voice ringing through the room. The hero who saved us all. Everyone raised their glasses, offering words of praise and gratitude. Sakura, too, raised her glass, her green eyes meeting Naruto's for a fleeting moment. Congratulations, Naruto, she said, her voice polite but lacking the warmth he longed for. Sasuke offered a curt nod. As Naruto met her gaze, a wave of conflicting emotions washed over him. There was a flicker of the old affection, a stubborn refusal to let go of the years of shared history. But it was quickly overshadowed by a sharp pang of resentment. Her congratulation felt like an obligation, a mere formality. There was no genuine warmth, no acknowledgement of the emotional distance that had grown between them. During the dinner, Naruto found himself growing increasingly withdrawn. He picked at his food, his appetite gone. The forced smiles of his friends felt like a painful reminder of the one smile he truly wanted to see directed at him with genuine affection. The constant awareness of Sakura and Sasuke's closeness was a dull ache in his chest, a persistent whisper of his unrequited feelings. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Naruto mumbled an excuse about being tired and needing to rest. His friends exchanged concerned glances, but they understood. The weight of the past few months, coupled with the emotional rollercoaster of the day, had clearly taken its toll. As he walked home through the quiet, post-celebration streets, the echoes of applause still ringing in his ears, a profound sense of loneliness settled upon him. The ceremony had been meant to honor him, to celebrate his achievements. But all he could remember was the image of Sakura's hand intertwined with Sasuke's, a silent testament to a connection he could never truly be a part of. He climbed the stairs to his apartment, the familiar creak of the wood a stark contrast to the celebratory music that had filled the air just hours before. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the festive banners he had seen earlier now feeling like mocking reminders of a happiness that eluded him. She doesn't even notice, he thought bitterly, the resentment he had suppressed earlier bubbling to the surface. She doesn't see how much this hurts. She's so wrapped up in her world with Sasuke that she's completely oblivious to how her indifference is affecting me. The memories of his lonely recovery in the hospital flooded back, the feeling of being forgotten, of being a secondary character in his own story. And now, even amidst the celebration of his greatest triumph, he felt that same sense of being on the periphery, an outsider looking in at a happiness that wasn't his. It's not just about her loving Sasuke, he continued his internal monologue, his thoughts becoming increasingly sharp and accusatory. It's the complete lack of consideration. The way she just moved on. No real concern for how I was doing, no acknowledgement of the bond we once shared. It's like our friendship, everything we went through together, doesn't even matter anymore. He remembered the countless times he had shielded her from danger, the unwavering support he had offered her, even when his own heart ached with unrequited love. He had risked his life countless times for her, for their team, for the village. And now, it felt as though his sacrifices were meaningless, his loyalty unacknowledged. Where's the basic human decency? The simple act of checking in on a friend who was seriously injured. The questions burned in his mind, fueled by a growing sense of hurt and betrayal. Is her infatuation with Sasuke so all-consuming that it blinds her to everything and everyone else? A cold resolve began to solidify within him, a stark contrast to the fiery passion that usually defined him. He couldn't continue to subject himself to this constant emotional torment. He couldn't keep hoping for a different outcome, clinging to the ghost of a friendship that seemed to have faded into oblivion. Enough, he thought, the word echoing with a newfound firmness in the silence of his room. Enough of this one-sided longing. Enough of feeling like an afterthought. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was becoming increasingly certain in Naruto's mind. He needed to create some distance, to protect his wounded heart. He needed to focus on his own healing, not just physically, but emotionally. And perhaps, just perhaps, that meant accepting the painful truth that the Sakura he had cherished, the Sakura he had always held a secret flame for, was no longer the Sakura who saw him, truly saw him. The echoes of applause from the ceremony faded into the night, replaced by the quiet whisper of a heart slowly beginning to let go. For Sakura Haruno, the immediate aftermath of the war was a disorienting paradox. Relief washed over her in waves, a soothing balm to the raw wounds of fear and loss. Yet, beneath this surface of peace, a disquieting undercurrent began to stir, a personal conflict that threatened to eclipse the hard-won tranquility. The very first day after the dust had settled, amidst the chaos of the medical tents, Sakura found herself drawn to Naruto's still form. He lay unconscious, his breathing shallow, the exhaustion of his immense power etched onto his young face. As the most skilled medical nin amongst them, it fell to her to the intricacies of his chakra pathways, the delicate web of energy that had been pushed beyond its limits. Hours she spent meticulously tracing the flow, her fingers ghosting over his skin, feeling the faint tremors and irregularities. It was a purely clinical examination, driven by professional duty and a deep-seated concern for her teammate. But as the initial urgency subsided and the more complex aspects of his healing began to stabilize, an unsettling awareness began to bloom within her. She found herself lingering longer than necessary, her gaze drifting from the medical charts to the contours of his body beneath the thin hospital gown. A strange heat would rise within her as she adjusted his bandages or checked his pulse. It was a purely physical reaction, unexpected and profoundly unwelcome. The lean strength of his arms, The curve of his jaw, the way his spiky blonde hair fell across his forehead, details she had never consciously registered before, now seemed to possess an unexpected allure. The sensation felt wrong, deeply so. Naruto was her teammate, her friend, almost like a brother in the chaotic tapestry of their shared history. To feel this unfamiliar pull towards him, this nascent awareness of him as a physical being, felt like a betrayal of their bond, a jarring dissonance in the symphony of their camaraderie. Adding to her discomfort was the undeniable intensity of her feelings for Sasuke. His return had ignited a flame she had carried within her for years, a burning desire for connection and understanding. She poured her energy into nurturing this fragile rekindling, desperate to forge a future with the one person who had always held such a powerful sway over her heart. The burgeoning physical awareness of Naruto felt like a dangerous complication, a treacherous undercurrent that threatened to derail her long-cherished dream. Furthermore, the most critical and intricate stages of Naruto's chakra recovery had passed. Her initial, intensive medical ninjutsu had addressed the immediate dangers and set him on the path to healing. The subsequent weeks required rest and the body's natural recuperative abilities, punctuated by routine monitoring. Her constant presence was no longer strictly necessary from a medical standpoint. And so, a subconscious decision began to form. Distance. She needed distance from Naruto, from the unsettling physical sensations he evoked, from the confusing emotions that threatened to surface. Being near him stirred something within her, a purely visceral response that felt inappropriate and disruptive. Maintaining a professional distance felt like the only way to safeguard her feelings for Sasuke and preserve the platonic foundation of her relationship with Naruto. As Naruto gradually recovered and began to move around the village, their paths inevitably crossed. Sakura observed him carefully, and a new layer of understanding began to color her perception of his behavior. Whenever his gaze fell upon her and Sasuke together, a flicker of something akin to pain would cross his features, quickly masked by a forced smile or a boisterous remark directed elsewhere. She saw the almost imperceptible clenching of his jaw, the subtle tension in his shoulders. It dawned on her with a jolt: jealousy. Naruto, her loud, often oblivious teammate, was jealous. The realization was both surprising and strangely poignant. Had his feelings for her run deeper than she had ever acknowledged? The thought added another layer of complexity to her already conflicted emotions. The idea that her proximity to Sasuke was causing him pain only amplified her desire to maintain a distance, to avoid inadvertently fueling his unspoken feelings and further complicating their dynamic. The celebratory dinner after Naruto's official discharge was a particularly uncomfortable affair for Sakura. Seated beside Sasuke, she was acutely aware of Naruto's presence across the room. She saw the forced brightness of his smile as he interacted with their other friends, the way his gaze would occasionally flick towards her and Sasuke, only to quickly dart away. The easy laughter that flowed around him seemed to carry a note of underlying loneliness when she focused solely on Naruto. She noticed the subtle ways he excluded himself, the moments of quiet withdrawal amidst the boisterous camaraderie. It was as if an invisible wall had sprung up around him, a self-imposed barrier against the discomfort of witnessing her closeness with Sasuke. The forced pleasantries exchanged during the toast felt hollow, the weight of their unspoken feelings hanging heavy in the air. Later that evening, as Naruto made his abrupt departure, citing exhaustion, Sakura watched him go with a knot of unease in her stomach. His loneliness was palpable, a stark contrast to the celebratory atmosphere of the dinner. And she knew, with a growing sense of guilt, that her own avoidance had likely contributed to that isolation. She had sought distance to protect her burgeoning relationship with Sasuke and to quell the unsettling physical awareness Naruto had inadvertently awakened within her. But in doing so, had she inadvertently wounded her friend, the one person who had always been a constant source of unwavering support in her life. The thought was a heavy weight in her chest, a silent accusation that echoed the unspoken loneliness she had witnessed in Naruto's eyes. The path ahead felt increasingly fraught, tangled with unacknowledged feelings and the growing awareness of a connection she had never fully understood. Sakura clung to the idea of a blossoming romance with Sasuke like a lifeline. She told herself that the initial awkwardness, the subtle distance that sometimes lingered between them, was merely the residue of their tumultuous past, a temporary hurdle on the path to a deep and meaningful connection. She actively willed herself to embrace every moment, every shared glance, every tentative touch, interpreting them as signs of progress, of a love finally taking root. The kissing started tentatively, often initiated by Sasuke. His lips would find hers with a certain urgency, a possessiveness that Sakura initially found both thrilling and slightly unsettling. For Sasuke, these moments seemed to hold a deeper significance, a tangible expression of their bond. But for Sakura, the kisses often felt distant. Good, technically. His lips were soft, the sensation pleasant. Yet, there was a lack of the spark, the overwhelming rush of emotion she had always associated with the idea of true love. It felt more like a ritual, a confirmation rather than a passionate outpouring. Sometimes, during their embraces, Sasuke's dark eyes would narrow slightly, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his features. It was as if he sensed a hesitation in her, a subtle reservation that belied her outward attempts at reciprocation. He never voiced his observations, but Sakura felt the weight of his unspoken scrutiny, a silent question hanging in the air between them. Days turned into weeks, and the kissing became a more regular occurrence. It was the next logical step, the unspoken progression towards solidifying their relationship. For Sasuke, it seemed to be a matter of course, an expected intimacy between two people who were finally together. But for Sakura, a growing unease began to fester beneath the surface of her forced enthusiasm. The pressure started subtly, a lingering touch that stayed a moment too long, a suggestive remark veiled in ambiguous words. Sasuke's desires were becoming more explicit, his intentions clear. He wanted to be physically intimate with her, to take their relationship to a deeper level. Sakura found herself increasingly resistant. It wasn't a matter of a lack of attraction to Sasuke, the years of longing had etched his image deeply within her. But the idea of physical intimacy with him now felt complicated. The emotional connection she craved, the sense of being truly seen and understood, felt fragile, overshadowed by his more insistent desires. She made excuses, citing the lingering effects of the war, her need to focus on her medical duties, the general disruption that still permeated the village. Sasuke would usually accept her deflections with a curt nod, but a shadow of impatience would often flicker in his eyes, a silent demand that made Sakura's heart pound with a mixture of guilt and apprehension. One evening, as they stood alone in the twilight, the air thick with unspoken desires, Sasuke's advances became more insistent. His hands, which usually held a controlled coolness, grew insistent as he pulled her closer. His kisses became more demanding, his touch more possessive. Sakura felt a rising panic within her, a sense of being cornered. She tried to pull back, a small, hesitant movement that Sasuke seemed to ignore. His grip tightened, his lips pressing against hers with a fervor that felt almost aggressive. A wave of claustrophobia washed over Sakura. This wasn't the tender intimacy she had envisioned. This felt wrong. Sakura was saying to him rapidly to stop and that she is not ready. Try to pushing him away, but Sasuke had made up his mind. Today he won't listen to any of her but act on his needs. Sasuke was thinking she was stopping him for no valid reason. He was touching her sensitive spots, causing her to feel increasingly uneasy and distressed. Sakura felt his one hand start to touch her. A surge of adrenaline coursed through her. She twisted in his grasp, a sudden burst of strength fueled by fear. She managed to break free, stumbling backward, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Sasuke stared at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and anger. Sakura, what's wrong? Tears welled in her eyes, a torrent of conflicting emotions threatening to spill over. She couldn't articulate the jumbled mess of feelings churning within her, the lingering physical awareness of Naruto, the growing disconnect with Sasuke, the feeling of being pressured into something she wasn't ready for. Sakura drifted through the twilight streets of Konoha, the raw humiliation and confusion of her encounter with Sasuke clinging to her like a shroud. Each step felt heavy, mirroring the leaden weight in her chest. The vibrant hues of the village at dusk, usually a source of comfort, now seemed to mock her inner turmoil, the laughter of children echoing like a distant, unwelcome melody. She found herself drawn, almost instinctively, towards the familiar training grounds, a place etched with the indelible memories of Team 7, a space where, perhaps, a sliver of understanding might be found amidst the wreckage of her emotions. As she neared the training area, the rhythmic sounds of exertion cut through the quiet evening air. Through the swaying branches of the surrounding trees, she spotted a solitary figure engaged in a rigorous kata, each movement precise and powerful. It was Naruto, his form a familiar silhouette against the fading light. Naruto could sense her presence. What he immediately registered was that she was alone. Sasuke, in the recent, fragile days of peace, had become an almost constant presence beside Sakura. To see Sakura standing by herself, somehow he got some courage to get near her and talk with her. A flicker of concern sparked within Naruto. He had noticed Sakura's head was down, something was not right, and the picture of isolated sorrow was a stark contrast to the usual dynamic between them. Now, seeing her standing alone, her shoulders slightly slumped, a silent testament to some inner pain, a wave of protectiveness washed over him. He approached cautiously, his own recent sadness momentarily forgotten in his worry for her. As he drew closer, the reason for her solitary vigil became heartbreakingly clear. The soft, telltale sheen of tears glistened on her cheeks, catching in the moonlight like scattered diamonds. Her gaze was fixed on the ground, her expression a mask of raw vulnerability, a stark contrast to her usual fierce determination. His heart clenched. He had seen Sakura cry before, in moments of intense pain or frustration, but this was different. This was a quiet, desolate sorrow that seemed to emanate from the very depths of her being. He wanted, more than anything, to chase away those tears, to bring back the bright, unwavering spirit he had always admired. Sakura, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, not wanting to startle her in her fragile state. Sakura flinched slightly at the sound of his voice, her head snapping up, her emerald eyes widening in surprise. She quickly wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, a futile attempt to mask her distress. Naruto, she said, her voice thick with unshed tears, a tremor running through it. He stepped closer, his brow furrowed with concern. Are you okay, Sakura-chan? You look like you're carrying the weight of the world. He hated seeing her like this, the vibrant energy that usually defined her dimmed by an unseen weight. Sakura offered a weak, watery smile that didn't reach her eyes. Yeah, I'm fine, Naruto. Just a lot on my mind. But Naruto saw through the flimsy pretense. He recognized the lingering redness around her eyes, the way her lower lip trembled slightly despite her attempts at composure. He remembered all the times she had been there for him, her unwavering support during his darkest moments. Now, he felt an almost desperate need to return that comfort, to be the one to lift her spirits. He wanted to offer her something genuine, something that transcended silly jokes. He remembered her quiet admiration for the resilience of the cherry blossoms after the harsh winter, their delicate beauty emerging from the cold. He knelt down, gently picking a small, late-blooming wildflower that grew near the edge of the training grounds, its petals a soft lavender. He offered it to her, his gaze earnest. Sakura-chan, it's not much, but, even after the toughest storms, new life finds a way. You're strong, Sakura-chan. Like these flowers. Sakura looked down at the small blossom in his outstretched hand. A flicker of something akin to surprise, perhaps even a touch of warmth, crossed her tear-stained face. She reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing against his as she took the flower. Thank you, Naruto, she said softly, her voice still thick with emotion, but a hint of genuine appreciation lacing her tone. Emboldened by this small connection, Naruto wanted to offer more tangible comfort. He remembered her trembling earlier, the subtle signs of distress that spoke of a deeper pain. Without thinking, his heart aching for her, he reached out, intending to offer a comforting hug, a simple gesture of solidarity, a silent acknowledgement of her unspoken suffering. He stepped closer, his arms opening slightly, a gesture of pure, platonic support. But as his hands drew near, a sudden, visceral reaction jolted through Sakura. The innocent gesture, the offer of warmth and solace, triggered a cascade of unwanted memories, a chilling echo of the violation she had endured at Sasuke's hands just hours before. The possessive grip, the forced intimacy, the feeling of being trapped and powerless, it all flooded back in a terrifying rush. Naruto's approaching touch, meant to soothe, instead felt like a suffocating reminder of that unwanted closeness. Her breath hitched, a strangled gasp escaping her lips. Her eyes widened in a sudden surge of panic, the gentle warmth she had momentarily felt replaced by a primal fear. Her body recoiled instinctively, every muscle tensing. The innocent gesture of comfort was misinterpreted, filtered through the raw trauma of her recent experience. In that moment of heightened anxiety, her perception twisted. Naruto's approaching figure, meant to offer support, became a sudden, overwhelming threat. The ingrained reflex to protect herself, to push away any unwanted physical contact, took over. Her hand shot out with a speed and force that surprised even herself. It wasn't the playful jab of a teammate, nor the frustrated punch of an argument. This was a raw, desperate act of self-preservation, a violent rejection of a perceived violation. Her palm connected with Naruto's cheek with a sickening thud, the force of the blow rocking his head back. It was an insulting slam, a visceral expression of her fear and distress, a desperate attempt to create distance. Naruto stumbled back, his blue eyes wide with shock and a profound, agonizing confusion. The warmth he had intended to offer shattered into a million icy fragments. The physical pain of the slap was nothing compared to the searing bewilderment that ripped through him. He had only wanted to comfort her, to offer a moment of solace in her obvious pain. He couldn't comprehend the sudden, violent rejection. A single tear, hot and heavy, escaped his eye, not just from the sting of the slap, but from the deep, incomprehensible hurt of her reaction. It traced a lonely, burning path down his injured cheek, a silent testament to the devastating impact of her unintended trigger. That's it, he said, his voice barely a whisper, thick with the sudden lump in his throat, the raw pain of the slap mingling with the deeper ache of her inexplicable hostility. He stood up slowly and turned around, saying, "Don't follow me, Sakura-chan." He turned abruptly, his back to her, his shoulders slumping under a weight that felt far heavier than any physical exhaustion. The vibrant energy that usually radiated from him seemed to drain away, leaving behind a hollow weariness that permeated the very air around them. "Just go away," he said, his voice flat and final, devoid of any of the usual warmth or playful exasperation, a quiet dismissal that cut deeper than any shouted accusation, severing a fragile thread he hadn't realized was so easily broken, leaving him adrift in a sea of confusion and hurt. He walked away, his figure receding into the lengthening shadows, swallowed by the encroaching darkness, each step carrying him further away from her, further away from the light that had always defined him. Sakura stood frozen, the small lavender wildflower clutched tightly in her trembling hand, her other hand pressed against her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her mind reeled, the adrenaline slowly fading, replaced by a dawning horror at what she had done. The raw fear that had propelled her violent reaction began to give way to a chilling understanding of the profound and perhaps irreversible damage she had just inflicted on the one person who had always been her most steadfast, if often unacknowledged, friend. The weight of her trauma had lashed out, leaving behind a wreckage of misunderstanding and pain, a silent testament to the invisible wounds that war had left behind. Sakura stood frozen, the small lavender wildflower clutched tightly in her trembling hand, her other hand pressed against her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her mind reeled, the adrenaline slowly fading, replaced by a dawning horror at what she had done. The raw fear that had propelled her violent reaction began to give way to a chilling understanding of the profound and perhaps irreversible damage she had just inflicted on the one person who had always been her most steadfast, if often unacknowledged, friend. The weight of her trauma had lashed out, leaving behind a wreckage of misunderstanding and pain, a silent testament to the invisible wounds that war had left behind. A wave of nausea washed over her, the metallic tang of shame rising in her throat. She had slapped him, Naruto, the one person who had always seen the best in her, who had relentlessly pursued her even when she had been cruel, who had celebrated her triumphs and shouldered her burdens as if they were his own. And she had struck him. Not a playful jab, not a frustrated shove, but a brutal, open-handed slap, fueled by her own pain and misdirected fear. The image of his face, the red imprint of her hand stark against his tanned skin, the single tear tracing a path down his cheek, it was seared into her memory, a brand of her own making. The pain in his eyes, the shock, the utter bewilderment, it was a reflection of the pain she had inflicted, a pain that echoed the violation she had suffered, a pain she had now, in her blind, terrified reaction, transferred to him. A desperate need to undo what she had done, to rewind time and erase that moment of violence, surged through her. She had to find him. She had to explain, though how could she possibly explain the inexplicable? How could she articulate the tangled mess of emotions that had led to that moment, the lingering trauma, the misdirected fear, the overwhelming sense of violation? She broke into a run, her feet pounding against the cobblestones, the lavender wildflower, now crushed in her trembling hand, a pathetic offering in the face of the damage she had caused. She called his name, her voice hoarse and desperate, the sound swallowed by the encroaching darkness. Naruto. Naruto, please, wait. She retraced his steps, her gaze frantically scanning the shadows, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The training grounds were deserted, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of crickets. He had vanished. A wave of panic washed over her. Where could he have gone? Had he gone home, to Ichiraku Ramen, his usual refuge? Or had he simply disappeared into the labyrinthine streets of Konoha, wanting nothing more than to be alone, to escape the sight of her, the memory of her touch? She ran, blindly, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her mind a whirlwind of guilt and regret. Each empty street, each silent alleyway, was a fresh wave of despair. She imagined him, alone and hurting, the weight of her betrayal crushing him. The thought was unbearable. Hours passed, blurring into a desperate, frantic search. She asked everyone she encountered, her voice pleading, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and remorse. Has anyone seen Naruto? Has anyone seen where he went? But the answers of the Night Watcher shinobis were always the same. A shake of the head, a confused glance, a silent, unknowing shrug. She was out all night. Hoping everything will be fine because it's Naruto. As the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky with streaks of pale pink and gold, Sakura found herself back at the training grounds, the place where it had all gone wrong. She sank to her knees, the crushed wildflower falling from her numb fingers, the weight of her actions crushing her. He was gone, and she had no idea if he would ever forgive her. The unintended trigger of her past trauma had shattered a bond she had taken for granted, leaving her alone in the cold, harsh light of a new day, facing the devastating consequences of her actions. Sakura's heart pounded with a dreadful premonition as she raced towards Naruto's apartment. The silence that had enveloped the training grounds after his departure had been heavy with unspoken accusations, a stark testament to her catastrophic mistake. The image of his retreating back, the single tear tracing a path of pain down his cheek, haunted her every step. Reaching in front of Naruto's apartment, she takes a deep breath. Hoping Naruto is inside, she has a key to his apartment. Naruto gave her a key a long time ago as a sign of trust. She puts the key in, slowly unlocking the door. Enter silently through the unlocked door of his small apartment. She was met with an unsettling scene of disarray. Dust motes danced in the weak morning light filtering through the grimy window. Clothes were strewn haphazardly across the floor, half-packed bags lay open on the worn tatami mats, and an overall sense of hasty abandonment permeated the small space. It was as if Naruto had been in the process of leaving, a silent confirmation of the finality in his last words. Her gaze frantically scanned the room, searching for any sign, any clue to where he might have gone. Her eyes landed on the overflowing wastebasket tucked in a corner. Amidst crumpled ramen wrappers and discarded tissues, a small, worn notebook lay half-buried. With trembling hands, Sakura retrieved it. The cover was faded and dog-eared, the pages yellowed with age. As she carefully flipped through it, her breath caught in her throat. It was filled with childish sketches, clumsy and endearingly earnest. Stick figures of a boy with spiky blonde hair and a girl with pink hair populated the pages, engaged in various childish activities, training, eating ramen, standing side by side against monstrous, poorly drawn enemies. It was a visual chronicle of their shared past, seen through the innocent eyes of a boy's burgeoning affection. Her heart ached with a sharp pang of guilt. These were the clumsy attempts of a boy who had cherished her, who had seen her as a central figure in his world, even when her own gaze had been fixed elsewhere. She reached the last page, her fingers tracing the faded ink. There, at the top, written in Naruto's unmistakable, slightly uneven handwriting, were the words, "My queen." The childish endearment had been brutally crossed out with a single, angry line. Beneath it, scrawled with a heavier hand, were two words that pierced Sakura's heart like a poisoned arrow: selfish bitch. A wave of nausea washed over her, the weight of her actions crashing down upon her with brutal force. This wasn't just hurt. It was a raw, visceral rejection, a final severing of the bond she had so carelessly wounded. Her gaze swept across the room again, and she noticed the almost complete absence of clothing in the open bags and the dilapidated closet, also miss all the weapons. It was undeniable. Naruto was leaving. But where would he go? And in his current state of emotional turmoil, what would he do? Panic clawed at her throat. She had to find him, before it was too late. With a desperate urgency, she raced towards the Hokage Tower, the only place she could think of where she might find answers. Tsunade's office was quiet, the early morning light casting long shadows across the Hokage's weary face. Sakura burst in, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her eyes wide with distress. "Hokage-sama, it's Naruto. He's leaving." Tsunade's brow furrowed, her gaze sharp. Leaving. What are you talking about, Sakura? Sakura recounted the events of the previous evening, her voice trembling as she described her encounter with Naruto, her ill-conceived attempts to cheer him up, and the devastating slap that had followed. She didn't try to excuse her actions, the shame still burning brightly within her. She explained finding his apartment in disarray, the heartbreaking notebook, the undeniable signs that he was preparing to disappear. Tsunade listened in grim silence, her expression hardening with each word. When Sakura finally finished, the Hokage leaned back in her chair, her gaze piercing. You slapped him, Sakura. Tsunade's voice was low, dangerous. After everything he has done for you. After the countless times he has risked his life to protect you, to bring back your precious Sasuke. After the unwavering love and loyalty he has shown you, even when you were blind to it. Tsunade's words were like a physical blow, each syllable a painful reminder of her own selfishness and the depth of Naruto's unwavering devotion. The Hokage's gaze softened slightly, a hint of sadness entering her eyes. As a mother figure to Naruto, she often visited Naruto at past. She recalled the countless times Naruto had confided in her, the innocent sketches he had shown her years ago, his unwavering, almost childlike adoration for Sakura. You were always oblivious, Sakura, Tsunade continued, her voice heavy with disappointment. You were so fixated on Sasuke that you never truly saw the heart that beat for you right beside you. But to insult him like that, after everything, that is a different level of cruelty. She sighed, rubbing a hand across her tired eyes. Naruto came to see me last night. He was sad and said he needs some change of air, and wanted a transfer. But I saw his eyes, he was hurt, Sakura. Deeply hurt. More than I've seen him in a long time. But I didn't know the cause. That time I may say no, but I already gave him the transfer permission. Tsunade said sadly. Sakura's heart sank. He had gone to Tsunade. He had sought solace, and even permission to leave. He's leaving the village? Sakura asked, her voice barely a whisper, the fear constricting her throat. Tsunade shook her head slowly. Not the village, not yet. But he has resigned from Team 7. The words hit Sakura like a physical blow. The bond of their team, fractured but always present, had finally been severed. He's what? Sakura stammered, her mind reeling. He requested a transfer. He told me that he want to join ANBUand because normal shinobi work will be waste of his strength and talent. Tsunade explained, her voice grim. He's joining the ANBUand Black Ops, for specialized training in one of their most isolated sectors. Sakura's blood ran cold. The ANBUand Black Ops, the elite shadow operatives, known for their ruthlessness, their efficiency, their detachment. It was a world of darkness and secrecy, a far cry from Naruto's usual boisterous, open nature. But that's for people who are emotionally detached, Sakura protested, her voice filled with a growing dread. Tsunade's gaze was unwavering. Exactly, Sakura. Naruto said, he needed to change. He needed to become someone different. A chilling premonition washed over Sakura. The pain in Naruto's eyes, the raw hurt in his voice, the finality of his departure from Team 7, what if this was more than just a desire for distance? What if the boy who had always been a beacon of hope and unwavering optimism was now walking down a darker path? What if, Sakura began, her voice trembling, the unspoken fear hanging heavy in the air, what if this changes him, Hokage-sama? What if he becomes brutal? What if he goes down the wrong path? Tsunade's expression was grave, her eyes filled with a profound concern. You know Naruto's strength, Sakura. His determination. If he channels that pain, that hurt, into the ANBUand training, he could become formidable. Unstoppable. She leaned forward, her gaze piercing. And you know, better than anyone, Sakura, there might not be anyone left who can stop him if that happens. The weight of her words hung heavy in the silent office, a chilling prophecy of a future Sakura had unknowingly set in motion. Where did he go for training? Sakura's voice was a mere whisper, laced with a desperate plea for any thread of hope. Tsunade's gaze softened slightly, a flicker of understanding in her weary eyes, but her resolve remained firm. I cannot tell you that, Sakura. But I need to talk to him, Sakura insisted, her hands clenching into fists. I need to explain. Tsunade shook her head gently. Naruto doesn't want that right now. He made that very clear. This training is something he needs. Something he sought out. It's in a highly secure, undisclosed location, far outside the village borders. No one can find him unless he chooses to be found. When will he come back? Sakura's voice was barely audible, the hope draining from her with each word. Tsunade sighed, a deep, weary sound. 3 months, maybe. It depends on his progress, how quickly he adapts to the demands of his training. It's intense, Sakura. Designed to strip away everything that isn't essential for survival in the shadows. She found herself avoiding Sasuke, the mere sight of him now stirring a complex mix of guilt, unease, and a dawning resentment. The memory of his insistent touch, the possessive demands, now felt repulsive, tainted by the knowledge of her own misplaced affections and the devastating consequences they had wrought. Weeks have passed out in the same manner. She will keep herself busy with hospital work. It's the only time she discovered that work can make her forget everything. Her focus in medical terms is something else. Ever since that night, Sakura couldn't bring herself to look Sasuke in the eye. They still crossed paths, but she always walked a little faster, turned a little sooner, disappeared a little too quickly. Sasuke noticed, of course. He wasn't blind. He knew she was avoiding him. And he knew why. That night had changed everything. The moment his hand had gripped her wrist a little too tightly, when his desire had started to cross a line she wasn't ready for. Sakura had felt the tremor in her heart split into something unrecognizable. Fear, disgust, confusion, love, all tangled and twisted until she couldn't breathe. She had run. And she hadn't looked back. The guilt of leaving without a word clung to her, but the fear of facing him and explaining something she didn't fully understand herself that was greater. What would she even say? That she still loved him, but something broke inside her that night. That she couldn't tell if it was him, or herself, she was angry at. She didn't know. So she said nothing. Naruto had tried to reach her to push away her unknown sadness. Always the light in her darkest hour, he'd shown up like he always did. Unshakable warmth in his voice. But her heart wasn't ready for kindness. Not when her mind was still haunted by the force of Sasuke's grip and unwanted touches, the way his shadow still lingered in her space. Naruto had only touched her shoulder, gently. She had flinched and without thinking, slapped him. Hard. The sound echoed in the silence between them. She had gasped, hand trembling, eyes wide with horror. Naruto, I didn't mean to. But the damage was already done. He had stood there for a moment, stunned, not by the slap, but by the look on her face. The pain, the fear, the apology she couldn't even say properly. And then, slowly, he had stood and turned away. Broken. That's it, he had said quietly. Don't follow me, Sakura-chan. And just like that, he was gone. Word spread days later that Naruto had joined for ANBUand training, an elite, brutal path far from the sun-soaked smiles he was known for. Sasuke Dono knew why, but Sakura did. She saw it in the mirror every morning, the echo of her hand, the look in his eyes, the pain she had caused. Sasuke didn't know the real reason. He didn't know Sakura had hurt him. Because if he did, if he ever found out, Sakura knew Sasuke. He might be emotionally detached, cold even, but his loyalty to Naruto was unshakable. His respect for his friend ran deep, buried beneath layers of silence, of pride, of scars neither of them talked about. He didn't show affection like others did. He never would. But if Sasuke learned she had laid a hand on Naruto even in a moment of confusion, even by accident, love go to hell. He would not hesitate. He would grab her by the throat, demand answers, unleash the part of himself he kept locked away for everyone except Naruto. Because Sasuke is Sasuke, after all. And Sakura, she was just trying to survive the storm she helped create. One afternoon, Sasuke appeared in Sakura's medical office, his usual stoic demeanor replaced by a desperate urgency. He watched her as she meticulously organized medical supplies, his dark eyes intense, almost pleading. Sakura, he began, his voice low and strained, why are you avoiding me? What has changed? Sakura kept her gaze fixed on the vials in her hands, unable to meet his intense scrutiny. The words caught in her throat, a tangled mess of guilt and dawning realization. Sakura, he pressed, stepping closer, his presence suddenly suffocating. Do you still love me? He is the straightforward one as always. The question hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the years she had dedicated to this very pursuit. But now, the answer felt hollow, uncertain. The image of Naruto's tear-streaked face, the weight of his broken trust, overshadowed everything. Yes, she managed, the word feeling foreign on her tongue, a hesitant whisper devoid of its former conviction. Sasuke's eyes narrowed, a flicker of suspicion crossing his features. Then why is there this distance? Why the hesitation when I want to be close to you? Sakura froze, her hands stilling on the vials. The memory of his forceful advances, the chilling echo of her fear, resurfaced with brutal clarity. If you love me, Sasuke continued, his voice taking on a demanding edge, you have to prove it. Intimacy, it's a part of love. Why this hesitation? His tone grew forceful, almost accusatory. He reached for her, his hand grasping her arm with a possessiveness that sent a shiver of revulsion down her spine. He leaned in, his intent clear, his lips closing in for a kiss that felt like a violation. This time, the fear and revulsion coalesced into a surge of anger, a fierce protectiveness of her own boundaries. Without conscious thought, her medical training taking over, Sakura's fist shot out with surprising speed and force. The sickening crack of bone echoed in the small office as her fist connected squarely with Sasuke's nose. He stumbled back, a strangled cry escaping his lips, blood gushing from his broken nose, splattering onto the pristine white floor. The force of the blow sent him reeling, his back slamming against the wall with a resounding thud, leaving a spiderweb crack in the plaster. Sakura stood there, her chest heaving, her hand trembling slightly, but her gaze unwavering. The years of suppressed frustration, the dawning realization of his self-centeredness, the burning guilt over Naruto, it all erupted in that single, decisive act. If that's all love means to you, Sasuke, she said, her voice trembling with anger and a newfound clarity, then I am breaking up with you. Instantly. Right here, right now. Her words hung heavy in the air, the finality undeniable. The years of longing, the carefully constructed dream, shattered into a million pieces, just like the plaster on the wall. For your stupid, selfish idea of love, she continued, her voice rising with righteous fury, tears that can be seen in her eyes, but this time, they were tears of anger and regret, I lost my friend. My precious friend's trust. Something you clearly know nothing about. She stepped closer, grabbed him by the collar, her gaze burning into his shocked and bleeding face. Don't ever come near me again, Sasuke. You You bastard. Then she let free his collar. Sasuke stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief and a flicker of something akin to a wicked amusement twisting his lips. He offered a small, unsettling smile, wiped the blood from his nose with the back of his hand, and then, without a word, turned and walked out of her office, leaving Sakura standing amidst the wreckage of her shattered dreams and the lingering scent of blood. She couldn't believe it. She had just hit the man she had loved for years. She had broken up with him. And the catalyst for it all was losing Naruto's trust. The realization struck her with the force of another blow. The pain of Naruto's absence, the weight of her betrayal, had finally eclipsed the years of her infatuation with Sasuke. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. How had she been so blind? How had she prioritized a one-sided obsession over the genuine, unwavering friendship that had always been her anchor? How the hell did he think he could just demand that? She thought furiously, the anger towards Sasuke a burning ember in her chest. His entitlement, his callous disregard for her feelings, suddenly became glaringly obvious. Sakura sank into her chair, her mind racing, connecting the disparate pieces of her recent actions. The unease around Sasuke, the volatile reaction to his touch, the overwhelming grief at Naruto's departure, it all pointed to a profound shift within her. She wasn't feeling bad about hitting Sasuke, about ending their long-awaited relationship. Her only real fear, the only true source of her anguish, was the devastating loss of Naruto's trust. The boy she had so often overlooked, the friend she had so carelessly wounded, had somehow become the most precious person in her life, his absence leaving a void that Sasuke's presence could never fill. The realization was both terrifying and liberating, a painful truth that had finally shattered the illusions she had clung to for so long. The sterile scent of antiseptic in her medical office, once a source of comfort and control, now felt suffocating, a constant reminder of her inability to heal the deepest wound, the one she had inflicted on Naruto. Every morning, as the first rays of dawn painted the Konoha sky with hues of hesitant hope, Sakura found herself walking the familiar path to the Hokage Tower. Each step was a silent plea, a desperate yearning for any sliver of news, any whisper of Naruto's return. Hokage-sama, anything. The question had become a daily ritual, a desperate mantra whispered across Tsunade's imposing desk. Tsunade's responses were always the same, a weary shake of her head, a sigh that spoke volumes of her own concern. Nothing, Sakura. When there is news, you will be the first to know. But the lack of information was a torment. The silence surrounding Naruto's whereabouts was a heavy shroud, amplifying Sakura's guilt and fueling her sleepless nights. The image of his face, contorted in pain and disbelief after her slap, haunted her dreams, morphing into grotesque figures of accusation and loss. The weight of his lost trust was a crushing burden, a constant ache in her chest that no amount of medical ninjutsu could alleviate. It was a far more profound agony than the years of unrequited love for Sasuke had ever been, a bitter testament to her own blindness and the true value of the bond she had so carelessly shattered. Sleep offered no respite. Instead, her nights were filled with restless tossing and turning, fragmented memories of Naruto's unwavering loyalty and her own callous disregard swirling in the darkness. She would jolt awake in a cold sweat, the echo of his whispered, "Go away," ringing in her ears, the phantom sting of her hand against his cheek burning on her palm. The vibrant energy of the village, the laughter of her friends, the ongoing rebuilding efforts, all seemed muted, distant, as if a vital color had been leached from her world. Meanwhile, far beyond the familiar borders of Konoha, in a desolate, unforgiving landscape shrouded in secrecy, Naruto was undergoing a brutal transformation. The ANBUand training facility was a crucible, designed to forge emotionless weapons from raw potential. The days were a relentless cycle of physical and mental torment, pushing him beyond the limits of human endurance. Every muscle screamed in protest as he navigated treacherous obstacle courses, scaled sheer cliffs with nothing but his bare hands, and engaged in grueling hand-to-hand combat with seasoned operatives who showed no mercy. Sleep was a luxury rarely afforded, snatched in brief, uncomfortable intervals between exercises that pushed him to the brink of collapse. Naruto found lay down broken. Bulled in his eyes, mouth and nose bleeding, some nails are missing and wounds all over the body. But he was reaching for something. Hell. This is hell. I can't take it anymore. Naruto said. He was holding a katana to his own throat. Desperate need to finish his life to end this pain. The intense pain of ANBUand training both physically and mentally. Forgot about Sakura's slap. Pain here is unbearable. He was stopped by a hard strong kick from ANBUand trainer that made him fly to a tree unconscious. This scene is common among the newcomers in ANBUand. Their chakra path will blocked for the first month training to make things critical and make shinobi strong physically. Food was often scarce, forcing him to rely on his instincts to survive in the harsh wilderness. He learned to track, to hunt, to kill with a cold efficiency that was alien to his former compassionate nature. The vibrant blue of his chakra, once a symbol of his unwavering spirit, now flickered with a darker intensity, honed for lethal precision. The mental conditioning was even more brutal. They stripped away his sentimentality, forcing him to confront his deepest fears and vulnerabilities, only to tear them down and rebuild him into someone detached, someone who could execute orders without question, without hesitation. He was taught to suppress his emotions, to view every individual as either an asset or a threat. The memories of his friends, the warmth of their camaraderie, the sting of Sakura's rejection, all were pushed down, buried beneath layers of hardened resolve. Survival became his sole focus. He learned to stalk prey through dense forests, his movements silent and deadly. He killed animals, rabbits, deer, even the occasional wild boar, his hands becoming stained with blood, a stark contrast to the healing touch he had so often witnessed in Sakura's hands. There were rumors among the trainees of even more extreme exercises, whispers of having to consume raw, writhing snakes to test their resilience and break their ingrained aversions. Naruto, driven by a desperate need to change, to become the emotionless operative they demanded, did what was necessary, a cold knot forming in his stomach with each forced act. The vibrant spark of his former self was slowly being extinguished, replaced by a chillingly efficient focus. The boisterous laughter that had once echoed through Konoha was silenced, replaced by a grim determination etched onto his young face. The desire for recognition, once his driving force, was buried beneath a growing indifference. He was becoming a ghost in the shadows, a lethal instrument forged in pain and isolation. Back in Konoha, Sakura continued her daily pilgrimage to the Hokage Tower, her hope dwindling with each passing day. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, a constant, suffocating reminder of the vibrant light she had extinguished in Naruto. The thought of him enduring such brutal training, driven by her rejection, was a torment. What was he becoming? Would he ever forgive her? Would he even want to? The fear that Tsunade had planted in her mind, the fear of a Naruto unleashed, a Naruto walking a dark path with no one to guide him back, gnawed at her incessantly. The hero of the Fourth Great Ninja War, the boy with the heart of gold, was being molded into something cold and potentially dangerous, and she was the catalyst. The realization was a crushing weight, a burden of guilt that threatened to consume her entirely. The echo of her slap reverberated not just in the silent training grounds, but in the hollow chambers of her own heart, a constant, agonizing reminder of the love and trust she had so carelessly thrown away. 2 months. An impossibly short span, yet an eternity in the desolate landscape of Naruto's brutal training. He had pushed himself relentlessly, driven by a cold, unwavering determination to become the weapon they demanded, to shed the remnants of the boy who had been so easily wounded. He had mastered the silent kill, the art of infiltration, the suppression of emotion. The vibrant blue of his chakra now pulsed with a controlled intensity, a honed edge capable of both immense power and lethal precision. He was leaner, his movements quicker, his gaze sharper, devoid of the easy warmth that had once defined him. The transformation was stark, unsettling. He stood before Tsunade in her office, 2 months to the day since his departure. The familiar setting felt alien, the Hokage's imposing presence now viewed with a detached, almost clinical assessment. He addressed her formally, his voice devoid of the usual playful banter. Hokage-sama. The absence of Granny, the affectionate, albeit slightly disrespectful, nickname he had always used, hung heavy in the air, a palpable testament to the change within him. Tsunade's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, a flicker of surprise crossing her usually stern features. She studied him intently, noting the stark transformation. The boyish exuberance was gone, replaced by a quiet intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. His gaze was direct, unwavering, devoid of the familiar spark of defiance or humor. This was not the Naruto she knew. Naruto, she began, her voice cautious, you've returned, sooner than expected. My training is complete, he stated flatly, his tone leaving no room for argument. I require a mission. Tsunade hesitated. She had hoped he would take time to rest, to readjust to the village, to perhaps heal. Naruto, you've been through an intense period. Perhaps you should take some time at home, recuperate. That is unnecessary, he interrupted, his voice firm, bordering on impatient. I will return in 1 hour. I expect a mission assignment prepared by then. One that utilizes my enhanced capabilities. If not, then I'll seek missions from ANBUand office. There was a cold certainty in his tone, a demand that brooked no refusal. Without waiting for a response, without even a nod of farewell, Naruto turned and left, a phantom disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. Tsunade watched his retreating figure, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. The transformation was undeniable, and the cold, driven individual who had just stood before her was a far cry from the boisterous, compassionate boy she had come to care for. Barely moments after Naruto's departure, the door to Tsunade's office burst open again, and Sakura rushed in, her face etched with a desperate hope. Hokage-sama, is there any news? Has Naruto? Her voice trailed off, her eyes searching Tsunade's face for any sign. Tsunade sighed, the weight of the situation heavy on her shoulders. He was just here, Sakura. Sakura's breath hitched, her eyes widening in disbelief. He's back. Where is he? I need to talk to him. She turned to leave, a frantic energy propelling her. Wait, Sakura, Tsunade's voice stopped her. He's already gone. He said he would return in an hour for a mission assignment. Sakura froze, her hope momentarily deflated. An hour. She could wait an hour. She would be there when he returned. She waits at the entrance of Hokage's tower. An hour stretched into what felt like an eternity. Sakura paced restlessly outside the Hokage tower, her anxiety growing with each passing minute. When the hour had passed, she rushed back into Tsunade's office, her heart pounding with anticipation. Hokage-sama, has he returned? Tsunade's expression was troubled. He came back, Sakura. Collected his mission briefing, and left. Sakura's voice was barely a whisper, her hope plummeting. But, where did he go? What was the mission? A long-range reconnaissance mission, Tsunade explained, her gaze distant. Solo. It will take him far from the village. Despair washed over Sakura. She had missed him. Again. The chance to speak to him, to try and explain, had slipped through her fingers like sand. A chilling thought struck her. She had been waiting right at the entrance to the Hokage Tower for almost an hour. She had been watching the main thoroughfare. Why hadn't she seen him? The Hokage Tower was the central hub of the village. There was no way he could have come and gone without her noticing, unless a cold dread seeped into her bones. It was as if he had become invisible, a phantom moving through the village unseen. And the speed with which he had completed his training, his abrupt demand for a mission, his almost ethereal departure, it all felt wrong. Sakura's face paled, her eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying realization. The boy she knew, the loud, boisterous Naruto, wouldn't have moved with such silent efficiency, such an unnerving lack of presence. ANBUand training, it had changed him more drastically, more profoundly, than she could have ever imagined. She returned to her medical office and the blockage was planned to open after his checkup at hospital when his chakra paths are fully healed. But he never went for a checkup. It will open on its own after some time as the story progresses. But now Naruto is running on his own chakra. A raw, visceral desperation clawed at Sakura's insides, a relentless yearning to confront the truth that festered between her and Naruto like a poisoned wound. The memory of her hand colliding with his cheek, the sickening thud that echoed the shattering of their bond, the raw, bewildered pain in his blue eyes, these moments replayed with agonizing clarity, a constant, brutal reminder of her unforgivable act. She had committed a sin against their shared history, a violation of a trust so freely given, and the weight of it pressed down on her, a suffocating shroud of guilt. She wears gloves for a particular reason. The skin on her right hand has become unusually sensitive due to frequent washing and the need to scrub hard to remove stubborn stains. Although the stain was merely a figment of her imagination, it seemed to cling stubbornly to her consciousness. No matter how many times she scrubbed her hands, the stubborn mark refused to disappear, forever etched in her thoughts like an invisible ink that would not fade. Sleep offered no sanctuary, no escape from the torment of her waking hours. Instead, her nights were a descent into the chillingly realistic landscapes of her nightmares. She would find herself standing in the familiar, yet now tainted, training grounds. The air would be heavy, thick with the unspoken accusations that hung between them. Naruto would be there, a shadowy figure in the distance, his back resolutely turned. As she called his name, her voice a strained, desperate whisper, he would slowly pivot, and his face would be a stark canvas of pain, the red imprint of her hand a livid brand. Sometimes, his eyes, usually so vibrant, would be dull and lifeless, reflecting a profound emptiness that mirrored the void she felt growing within herself. Other nights, the setting would shift to the Hokage's office, but the familiar warmth would be absent, replaced by a chilling stillness. Naruto would stand before Tsunade, his posture rigid, his voice a cold monotone as he requested another perilous mission. Sakura would watch from the periphery, an invisible observer, her heart twisting with a helpless anguish as she witnessed the light extinguish from his eyes, replaced by a hollow resignation that spoke of a spirit slowly surrendering. The most agonizing dreams were those where she saw him, not in places of conflict, but in the quiet corners of the village they once shared. He would walk past the ramen shop, his favorite haunt, without a glance. He would pass the training grounds, the site of so many shared moments, his gaze fixed straight ahead, devoid of recognition. She would try to reach out, to touch his arm, but her hand would pass through him as if he were a ghost, a phantom limb of a past she had destroyed. The silence in these dreams was deafening, broken only by the frantic pounding of her own heart, a desperate drumbeat against the encroaching oblivion. True to Tsunade's grim pronouncements, Naruto returned from his missions with an unnerving frequency, a fleeting shadow passing through the heart of Konoha. He never lingered, never sought the solace of rest in his neglected apartment. He sporadically comes back to his apartment, primarily when he feels the need for something specific, such as a refreshing shower or a change of clothes. Despite having a place to stay, he never returns for sleep or relaxation. It's as if his apartment serves merely as a temporary stopover, a place for practical necessities rather than comfort or repose. His existence had become a stark cycle of briefing, execution, and immediate departure, a relentless pursuit of the next perilous task. He addressed Tsunade with a chillingly formal, Hokage-sama, his requests for increasingly dangerous assignments delivered in a voice stripped of all inflection, all trace of the boisterous, determined boy she once knew. Sakura, driven by a desperate, almost primal need to see him, to somehow force a confrontation, haunted the corridors outside the Hokage's office. She would endure agonizing hours, perched on a hard bench, her heart leaping at every approaching figure, only to be met with disappointment as another shinobi passed by. Then, a fleeting whisper would ripple through the ranks, "Naruto-sama is back," and her heart would lurch with a surge of desperate hope. She would scramble to intercept him, racing towards the Hokage's office, only to find the air still and the scent of ozone and faint blood the only evidence of his recent presence. He was a phantom, appearing and vanishing with an almost supernatural swiftness, a stark testament to the lethal efficiency the ANBUand had forged within him. Each missed encounter was a fresh stab wound to her already ravaged soul. The weight of her guilt intensified, the nightmares grew more vivid and suffocating, and the chilling fear of what Naruto was becoming solidified into a terrifying certainty. His life was no longer about protecting the village or striving for recognition, it was a reckless plunge into the heart of danger, a grim dance with death in the deepest shadows. The missions Tsunade reluctantly assigned him were becoming increasingly suicidal. Infiltrating heavily fortified enemy encampments with minimal backup, engaging entire platoons single-handedly, retrieving highly volatile intel from the most treacherous territories, the odds of his safe return dwindled with each assignment, sometimes teetering on the brink of statistical impossibility. It was as if he were actively seeking oblivion, his life a disposable tool in the hands of the village, a silent testament to a spirit that had lost its will to survive. Tsunade's concern for Naruto's rapidly deteriorating state was a palpable presence in her office. The vibrant, resilient boy she had taken under her wing was fading, replaced by a gaunt, haunted figure who returned from each mission cloaked in the stench of death and his own blood. He would offer curt reports, his eyes devoid of emotion, his injuries dismissed with a chillingly indifferent shrug. It was as if the very instinct for self-preservation had been extinguished within him. One rain-swept evening, after another fleeting glimpse of Naruto's retreating shadow, Tsunade summoned Sakura to her office, her face etched with a profound weariness. "Sakura," she began, her voice heavy with a concern that mirrored Sakura's own gnawing fear, "we need to talk about Naruto. His latest mission, the chances of survival were negligible. Yet, he volunteered without hesitation." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "He's not just taking risky missions, Sakura. It's as if he has no desire to return. As if he's actively seeking death." Tsunade's voice cracked with a raw emotion that Sakura rarely witnessed. "He comes back, covered in blood, Sakura. His own and others. And there's nothing in his eyes. No triumph, no relief, just emptiness." Tsunade's gaze pierced Sakura's, the unspoken accusation hanging heavy in the air. "Sakura, think about it. Why would he want to be here? In this village? What reason does he have to fight for a life that clearly holds no joy for him anymore?" Her voice softened, tinged with a heartbreaking sadness. "He's a young man, Sakura. Alone. He's lost so much, and now he seems to have lost the will to live." The weight of her words settled heavily in the silent office, a chilling indictment of the devastating consequences of Sakura's impulsive act. Tsunade's words echoed in the hollow chambers of Sakura's heart, each syllable a painful reverberation of her catastrophic mistake. Why would he want to be here? In this village? What reason does he have to fight for a life that clearly holds no joy for him anymore? He's a young man, Sakura. Alone. He's lost so much, and now he seems to have lost the will to live. The stark pronouncement hung in the air, a chilling indictment of her blindness. Naruto, the sunniest soul she had ever known, the boy who had chased after her with a relentless devotion that now seemed almost mythical in its purity, was teetering on the precipice of oblivion. But what was his reason before? The question surfaced, sharp and accusatory. What had tethered him to this village, to this life, before the darkness had begun to consume him? The answer, when it finally clawed its way through the layers of her self-absorption, struck her with the force of a physical blow. Was it me? The realization was both devastating and profound. Had his unwavering loyalty, his boundless optimism, his very will to fight, been rooted in his feelings for her? Had his clumsy attempts at affection, his steadfast presence by her side, been the anchors that kept him grounded? Did he love me that much? The childish sketches in the worn notebook flashed through her mind, the earnest depictions of them side by side, the clumsy rendering of her image. The crossed out, "my queen," replaced by the venomous, "selfish bitch." The pendulum swing of his emotions, from adoration to bitter rejection, spoke volumes of the depth of his feelings, feelings she had so carelessly dismissed, so utterly trampled upon. How could I have been so blind? The question was a silent scream within her, a lament for the years she had spent chasing a shadow, oblivious to the radiant light that had shone so brightly beside her. A fierce resolve hardened within Sakura, a desperate determination to atone for her blindness, to pull Naruto back from the brink. He has no reason to return. I will become his reason. I will become his reason to live, his reason to come home. But the enormity of the task crashed down upon her. How? He was out of reach, a phantom flitting through the shadows, his life a relentless cycle of perilous missions. How could she penetrate the walls he had erected, the cold detachment that now shielded his wounded heart? Then, a memory surfaced, vivid and warm, a stark contrast to the cold dread that had been her constant companion. Naruto, standing in the doorway of his small, cluttered apartment, a wide, welcoming grin splitting his face, a spare key extended towards her. Here, Sakura-chan. You're welcome whenever you want. Consider this your second home, Dadbao. Be my family. The casual invitation, the earnestness in his blue eyes, the unspoken depth of his acceptance, it all flooded back, a poignant reminder of the unwavering offer she had never truly embraced. All she thought was that as a very friendly gesture. His apartment. The key. A tangible link, a space he had openly invited her into, a place filled with the echoes of his unreserved heart. Even in its current state of disarray, it might still hold a trace of him, a connection to the boy she had known, a place where she could wait, a silent promise of her changed heart. With a newfound sense of purpose, Sakura made her decision. Clutching the memory of the offered key like a precious talisman, she resolved to move into Naruto's apartment. She would surround herself with the remnants of his life, hoping to understand the depths of his pain, hoping that her presence, however silent, might somehow reach him, might become a beacon in his darkness, a living testament to her regret and her unwavering hope for his return. She will wait there for his return. He will definitely come at his home after all. The first night in Naruto's apartment was surprisingly peaceful. Slipping the key into the lock, the familiar click echoing in the silent hallway, felt like a small act of defiance against the overwhelming despair that had consumed her. Despite the lingering disarray, the dust motes dancing in the moonlight, a strange sense of comfort settled over Sakura. The chaotic energy that usually permeated the small space had been replaced by a quiet stillness, yet beneath it, She could sense the faint echoes of his presence, the lingering scent of ramen, the worn patches on the tatami mats where he often sat, the childish doodles still clinging to the refrigerator door. For the first time in months, the nightmares did not come. The familiar landscapes of guilt and loss remained at bay, replaced by a deep, dreamless sleep. It was as if the very air in the apartment held a soothing quality, a silent reassurance that she was closer to him here, within the sphere of his absent presence. A small, undefined but profound comfort settled over her, a fragile seed of hope planted in the barren landscape of her regret. A soft sigh escaped Sakura's lips as she settled onto Naruto's narrow futon, the faint, lingering scent of his familiar soap a subtle comfort against the sterile backdrop of her recent existence. A profound sense of peace, unexpected and almost unsettling, washed over her. Why here? She wondered, her gaze drifting around the small, cluttered room. It was, by any objective standard, a far cry from the neat, organized space of her own apartment. Ramen wrappers still lurked beneath the low table, a haphazard stack of manga leaned precariously against the wall, and dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight filtering through the grimy window. She cleaned all the mass he left, removing dust and spider waves. Yet, despite the disarray, a profound sense of ease settled within her, a quiet stillness that had eluded her for weeks. For the first time since the catastrophic slap, the relentless gnawing in her chest eased. Her shoulders, perpetually tense with guilt and anxiety, finally relaxed. Even her breathing seemed to deepen, each inhale a small act of surrender to this unexpected tranquility. Why can I sleep well here? The question echoed in the silence of the small room. In her own meticulously clean apartment, sleep had become a battlefield of nightmares, a relentless replay of her devastating mistake. Here, surrounded by the tangible remnants of Naruto's life, a strange sense of safety enveloped her, a silent promise that the darkness wouldn't encroach. I feel relaxed. It was an almost unbelievable sensation. The constant hum of anxiety that had been her unwelcome companion had receded, replaced by a quiet hum of something else. Something akin to belonging. It's like my heart wants this. The thought surfaced, surprising and a little ridiculous. This cramped, messy apartment, a far cry from the aesthetic she usually preferred, felt right. It was as if an invisible tether, long stretched and strained, had finally found its anchor. Ridiculous and small flat. Objectively, it was. Barely enough room for a single person, cluttered with the detritus of a simple life. In the eyes of someone detached, someone who didn't know the warmth that had once radiated from these walls, it might even be considered disgusting. But yet it feels so good in here. The contradiction was undeniable, a testament to something deeper than mere aesthetics. It was a feeling that resonated in the very core of her being, a quiet recognition that transcended logic. It feels like home. The realization struck her with a gentle force, a quiet understanding that settled over her like a warm blanket. Home, a word that had always been synonymous with her own carefully curated space, now found an unexpected resonance in this small, messy flat. A memory surfaced, unbidden, a soft echo of Naruto's voice, earnest and heartfelt. He had been speaking to a young orphan at the village, a child with wide, lost eyes. Hey, home isn't just a place, you know. It's where your heart feels at peace. Or where someone waits for you, with a warm heart. That's home, Dadbeo. His simple words, spoken with such genuine compassion, resonated with a profound truth now. This small, cluttered space, imbued with the lingering essence of his unwavering spirit, felt like a place where her heart could finally rest. It was a space where, even in his absence, she felt closer to him, a silent acknowledgement of a connection that ran deeper than she had ever understood. And the desperate hope that he would one day return to this space, to her waiting warmth, became a fragile but persistent ember in the quiet stillness of his unexpected home. Days bled into weeks within the sterile quiet of Naruto's apartment, Sakura finding a strange solace in the absence of its owner. Meanwhile, in the hidden veins of Konoha's underbelly, time warped and accelerated for the newly christened Shadow Operative. Naruto's progress within the ANBU was nothing short of meteoric. His raw power, coupled with the brutal efficiency honed in his accelerated training, made him a force to be reckoned with. Within a single month, he had not only mastered the advanced techniques but had displayed a tactical acumen that belied his former impulsive nature. He was no longer a lone wolf, he was a leader. Tsunade, recognizing his exceptional capabilities and perhaps hoping to exert some measure of control over his self-destructive tendencies, formed a specialized team around him. It was an unprecedented arrangement, a testament to Naruto's unique, albeit unsettling, talent. The team consisted of Captain Yamato, whose would-release jutsu provided both formidable offense and unparalleled control, Captain Sai, whose ink creations were versatile tools for reconnaissance and attack, his detached demeanor masking a complex inner world shaped by his rude upbringing, and Tenten, a master of weaponry and space-time ninjutsu, her proficiency in summoning and sealing an arsenal making her a formidable asset. Yamato and Sai carried the heavy burden of Konoha's dark secrets, their formative years spent within the emotionless confines of Root, Danzo's clandestine organization. They were survivors, their loyalty forged in the fires of a childhood devoid of warmth. Tenten, on the other hand, was an orphan, her life dedicated to the mastery of every conceivable weapon. The tragic loss of Neji during the war had extinguished the last embers of romantic love in her heart, leaving her a fiercely independent, yet emotionally guarded, woman. This unconventional team, led by a captain of captains, defied standard ANBU protocol, which dictated a single leader per squad. Yet, their synergy was undeniable, their teamwork bordering on the uncanny. Naruto, the once goofing, unpredictable knucklehead, now orchestrated their missions with a precise, almost preternatural awareness. His plans were intricate webs of strategy, adapting to unforeseen circumstances with a fluidity that consistently surprised even his seasoned teammates. Each mission was a testament to his evolved intellect, a display of tactical brilliance that left their targets dismantled and their objectives secured with ruthless efficiency. Together, this formidable quartet tackled the most dangerous and complex assignments Konoha had to offer. They dismantled rogue ninja cells, neutralized high-level threats, and retrieved sensitive information from heavily fortified locations with a success rate that bordered on the miraculous. Their reputation within the ANBU grew swiftly, a legend whispered in the shadows, an unstoppable force led by the enigmatic Captain Uzumaki. Soon, Naruto and his team had completed so many high-risk missions that Tsunade found herself with a dearth of suitable assignments. The simple, routine tasks held no appeal for the newly forged Shadow Operative. The thrill of the impossible, the razor's edge of danger, had become his new addiction, a substitute for the emotional connection he had severed. Risk is not a word for the war hero. But in missions there is no place for mistake. One mistake and you're done for. Who can match his strength in fight? No one. But you have to be alert even in sleep. Restless and seeking purpose in the familiar darkness, Naruto turned his gaze towards the foundation, the lingering, shadowy remnants of Danzo's root. It was a place where the lines between right and wrong blurred, where missions were often morally ambiguous and shrouded in absolute secrecy. He sought out a contact within its hidden network, his reputation preceding him. The mission he accepted was unlike any he had undertaken before. It was a long-term infiltration, requiring him to embed himself deep within a hostile organization in a neighboring country, gathering intelligence over an extended period. The estimated duration was approximately 2 years, a prospect that offered him the very thing he consciously craved. Naruto had been demanding this kind of long-term mission for a long time. A mission that would allow him to